Go ahead and get started today. I just wanted to welcome everyone to the third and final of our 3 webinars presented by Bartlett Tree Experts. Today's topic is sustainable landscape management, back to the basics. I'm Sheila Knotts, chair of the Horticulture, Greenhouse, and Facilities community. And we're so appreciative of Bartlett Tree Experts for sharing their knowledge with us in this amazing webinar series. Today's session will be recorded and posted in the Library Media Center, and we'll cross-post it on the HGF discussion board. It is for members only. In the webinar format today, there will be no attendees video or ability to talk, but we please encourage you to post your questions using the Q&A feature, not chat, but go ahead and post those questions as you think of them, and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. If you need closed captioning, use the CC at the bottom of Zoom. Our speaker today is Paige, Director of Horticulture and Curator for the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory Arboretum. Greg discovered his career goal early, creating and working in beautiful public gardens and sharing and teaching this passion with others. Prior to joining the Bartlett Tree Research Laboratory as Director of Horticulture and Arboretum Curator in 2005, his 25-year career in public horticulture involved working at some of the finest gardens in the country: Daniel Stowe Botanical Garden in Belmont, North Carolina, the Scott Arboretum of Swarthmore College, the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina, the Holden Arboretum outside Cleveland, Ohio, and the Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. Now I'd like to turn it over to Greg.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? This topic today is one that's kind of near and dear to my heart. It's something that all through my career have been working with, and I'm sure a lot of you also have been working in this direction. And it's something that was a hot topic 5-10 years ago and hasn't fallen off the radar for lots of reasons, but it's not talked about as much as it should be. So the focus of what I wanted to talk about today is kind of rehashing and re-looking at some of the sustainable landscape management practices. And the little cherry on top for me is being lucky to work where I do. We do a lot of research in a lot of these areas, and also want to highlight some of the science-based research that we've been working on here for well over 50 years. So without further ado, I'm gonna launch into things, and also wanted to say I hope everyone is doing well right now with everything. Everybody's happy and healthy, and look forward to doing these things live and in person with the APGA community in the not too distant future. So hope everybody's had a good fall, going into a good holiday season, and I look forward to seeing everybody in person not in the not too distant future. So let's jump right into things with a definition. Sustainable landscape management. It's basically just managing a landscape using practices to preserve limited and valuable natural resources while maintaining good, solid plant health and reducing our impacts on the environment. And ways that sustainable landscape management reduces the impact on the environment is helping to control and reduce water pollution, the consumption of water, how we use it in our irrigation practices, steering away from invasive species and using diverse plants in our landscape, carbon sequester, which has become very important in our landscapes, pesticide use and how we use pesticides, and at the end of the day, our living, breathing landscapes help with air pollution. And one of the first pronged approaches to sustainable landscape management is what we call this 3-legged stool of integrated pest management, IPM, and having 3 strong structures to maintain a landscape healthy with chemical controls, biological controls, and cultural controls. And the thing that I like to focus and push on with sustainable landscape management is the cultural side of these controls. So we'll talk a lot about those as we whip through these slides today. Starting out with IPM, having a good scouting program is very important. Actually getting out and engaging with our landscapes. I thought being locked at home with the pandemic would give me the opportunity to be out in the gardens a lot more. And unfortunately, I seem to be trapped inside quite a bit. So finding time to get out into the landscapes and do some scouting. Within those practices, growing and maintaining a diverse landscape. Diversity is a key to many things in life. Having regular times when you go out to look at things, develop a plan that fits your threshold of tolerance. Some of us can tolerate a little bit of insect damage. Some of us can't tolerate any. So finding that good happy medium. Know the good guys from the bad guys. That's also with insects and diseases. Keep the good guys around. That's very important because beneficial insects do a lot of good work in the landscapes. Be proactive, not reactive. Stay on front of things and get educated. Attend things like this. There's so much stuff on the web now with IPM. It's very, very easy to link into stuff and find things that you need from a regional standpoint that'll help you maintain your landscapes better. So knowing the good guys from the bad guys, this is something that we do a lot in our landscapes. We do a lot of beneficial insect releases here. We do a lot of planting that encourages beneficial insects as well as pollinators. So that's a good sign of a healthy landscape, is that you have things like these guys here, brown lacewing and ladybug larvae. So when it's time to panic is if you had a lot of these in a landscape. Maybe, maybe not, one or two. This is a hickory horn devil, not going to do very much damage. When you're scouting, looking close at things or the underside of leaves, finding things like this. This is a dogwood sawfly, which actually wasps and hornets do a good job controlling this. So knowing the good guys from the bad guys is very important. And can't emphasize enough to be proactive. The sooner you notice something, the easier it is going to be to control, and the less bigger chemical control you might need or cultural control. If you get ahead of it sooner, it's going to be less of a problem. All common sense and rehashing things that we always know. One of the big things that we look at in my arboretum and from a company standpoint is the soil, managing the landscape from the ground up. Everything starts there. Any type of healthy, happy plant, that's the first hurdle to look at is what's going on below the ground. A lot of times we inherit this before we have plants to put in place. Maybe not so much in a garden, but our audience's landscapes are going to interact with this type of stuff. This was a new building that we put in place here. And after all the construction was said and done, I had to use this and turn it into something that was manageable where we could grow plants in. So it's really important to know what's going on under the ground. And basically soil will determine what type of species are going to thrive in those different types of soil. It's going to determine the health and the longevity of any plants that you plant in your gardens and your landscapes. And everything kind of stems from here, from soil compaction. It's ubiquitous in all urban environments. Kim Coder at the University of Georgia has this quote, and it has stuck with me over the years, is any place that man interacts with the soil and equipment and infrastructure, there's going to be some significant soil compaction going on. Dr. Philip Krall is another soil scientist that we've done a lot with, and he's developed these characteristics of urban soil, which help you better understand kind of what's going on. There's a lot of variability vertically and horizontally in urban soils, different ranges of compaction. When the soil is compacted, and particularly the crust, it can be hydrophobic and it doesn't let water drain and percolate through. The pH is often modified. A lot of times it's high in alkalinity. There's restricted aeration and water drainage because of that compaction. And because of the compaction, because of the lack of movement in the soil, the nutrient cycles are often interrupted and non-existent. And as you saw in that picture, a lot of times there's contaminants present in the soil, bricks, trash, fuel. It's a whole range of things, and things that you're going to have to deal with to get a nice, healthy landscape. And with that compaction, lack of organic matter and all those things, the soil temperatures are going to be highly variable as well. So what's happening with that compaction? And this is what we're all going for, but often not what we're dealing with. Ideally, there's going to be 50% pore space for air and water to move, and ultimately the roots of plants. You're going to have at least 5% organic matter and 50% soil particles and soil matter. Unfortunately, this is what we're dealing with. Very little micropores, very little macropores, mostly soil, hard matter. And all those things keep the roots from penetrating into the soil. They lower the availability of water because it doesn't percolate all the way through. It increases that soil to stay wet or become hypoxic. It causes nutrient stress and ultimately reduce photosynthesis rate, stress in the plant material, which can succumb to the death of the plant. So what can we do to make these soils more productive and user-friendly in our landscapes? And pretty much everything stems from low organic matter in soil. Most of our urban soils, and in some cases even our garden soils, lack those basic structures for organic matter. Organic matter is a good source of carbon. It helps with water holding capacity. It increases aeration and porosity in the soil, and it's crucial for holding nutrient retention and building good soil structure. So how do we inhibit organic matter from soil? Right now in my neighborhood, as I speak, people are going with reckless abandon, removing every single leaf that falls off trees in their landscape. And that's free organic matter. Never mind the fact that all this stuff's going to end up in our landfill. There's a better way to handle that. If it's in lawns and turf grass, and we did this when I worked at the Scott Arboretum, we grind up those leaves because it's good to help build up the turf grass. Preaching to the choir, there's lots of implements for mowers, there's mulching blades, all kinds of things that help to chop those leaves up into small particles so that they're more readily available. We have 2 of these gadgets in my arboretum where we'll capture the leaves in a mower and back the mowers into our beds where we can dump those leaves and then spread them around to help interact with the mulch in the plant beds. Another thing in regarding of soil that often falls by the wayside, we learn about this in college and kind of tuck it away, but pH is very, very important. It's directly related to and affects the nutrient availability of what's going to happen with that soil. So, we strive for 6.5, kind of in the medium there. And if you look at the chart where the white part is wider, those are the nutrients that are more readily available to your plants in that soil. So pH is very, very important. And that's an easy fix in most cases with organic matter, sulfur, and other things with a simple pH test to determine what your pH is for your particular garden soil. And where do the roots grow? If you think about roots and trees and things, and why do they grow there? They're very opportunistic. They're gonna grow where there's water, where there's air, i.e. no compaction, and where there's nutrients and organic matter. That's where you're gonna find roots of your plants. We like to play around with root systems here to get a visual to look at where they are. The picture here is of an elm tree, and that's just at the surface. We pulled all the mulch away, blew that away with an air spade to get a really nice visual of all those feeder roots in the top 4 to 6 inches of the soil and how important that is for the health of that tree. So managing from the grounds up, some research that we've been looking at for a while on improving urban soils. And, fertilizer doesn't solve all the problems with urban soil. It doesn't do much for soil compaction, doesn't do much for nutrient poor soil. It can swing that either way. It doesn't do much for low organic matter and doesn't do anything for lack of or improper mulching. So one of the ways to get rid of soil compaction is some sort of tillage. Fertilize after you've tested to see what you need. Incorporate organic matter. The cheapest, easiest, fastest way to improve plant healthcare is just simply adding organic matter, and proper mulching. Very simple cultural things that we can do and things that we've looked at from a research standpoint. And one of the things that we've done here is the air spade. We call it root invigoration, where we blow supersonic air in the root system of a tree or shrub, also in planting beds, to loosen up that soil without damaging any of the plant's existing root systems that might be present. And as we've moved along with this over the years to kind of refine it and make it a better system to improve urban trees, urban plants, is once that soil is loosened, is to amend it with fertilizer after we've tested and organic matter and swirl that all in so it's in that top 4 to 6 inches of the soil for those plants' roots. Another thing research-wise that we've been looking at, and again, this was something that was all the rage 5 years ago, but we're still doing a lot of research and looking into it, is incorporating biochar as a permanent organic matter source into garden soils and around trees. Initially, the things that we've seen with biochar are the incredible water and nutrient retention capabilities, and also biochar has huge surface area, which is great for retention of nutrients and microbes and moisture and organic matter and all those things. And it also helps sequester carbon into the soil. So a lot of good touchy-feelies and a lot of good cultural things for plants. So those amendments are added in, they're swirled around with the air spade. And once we do that, we immediately mulch, irrigate that as the final steps. And that irrigation, that organic matter, that incorporation in the soil is basically making compost tea kind of on site once you add water to that elixir. It's something that we do on small trees, something we do in small landscape beds. When we're prepping big beds here in the Arboretum, we'll do that to help loosen up the soil. It makes planting go so much faster, but it's something that we've done a lot of research in and feel that it's a good tool to help sustainably help landscapes do better for the immediate future. So speaking of tea, this is a whole other talk and don't want to go into it in a lot of details, but when we get to the end, happy to answer questions. We've done a good bit of research on tea and have found that simply just adding compost is much better than adding any aerated compost tea that you can purchase off the market. We did a lot of work with Bryant Shambracher, who was at the Morton Arboretum, one of their research scientists, and several other people and researchers here. And you know, all the science, all the numbers point to the fact that you know, simply adding compost to the soil is much better than compost tea. Here's a chart from Brian's research, and just looking at it at a quick glance, you can see, you know, simply adding water is almost as beneficial as compost tea. And, you know, that's kind of a no-brainer. If you water a plant and it needs that water, it's going to have some effects. Plain wood chips had higher return. Compost was the easiest and had the strongest signs. Adding fertilizer, we did that just to see what we would come up with, and obviously you're going to get some growth. Biochar and biochar with compost had very high results, and they use a lot of biosolids in the Midwest, and those had strong results to improving the soil as well. So the bottom line is there's a lot of buyer beware with compost tea products. If it's something you're making on site and you've had good results with it, keep on trucking with it, but kind of be careful with what you're choosing when you're picking things like compost teas that are marketed. Real briefly, just to kind of explain biochar a little bit for those of you that don't know, it's something that's been around for thousands of years. It's when you superheat an organic matter and burn it similar to charcoal through a process called pyrolysis, which burns out all the impurities of that. And it has a lot of really good effects in low nutrient soil, surface area, water retention, carbon sequestering, and building those homes for microbes to kind of build in. It can be made from pretty much anything organic. They use it here in North Carolina with chicken products, both chicken parts and chicken waste, switchgrasses, corn stover. The product that we use is made from wood solids and wood waste. So there's a lot of variabilities in the different things that biochar is made out of. I mentioned the term terra preta, which means dark earth. They found it in Amazon cultures and in digs that have been in the ground for thousands of years old, where, you know, the organic matter isn't readily available in the jungles because it breaks down so quickly. But once it's incorporated in, it always kind of stays there. So we've looked at ways to use this from a landscape maintenance perspective. And initially finding the products was difficult, finding something that was consistent, something that was easy to work with. We're lucky to have somebody now that sells it to us in bags, so it's really easy to incorporate when we're doing air spading. We put it in our potting mix. We incorporate it when we do new plantings to a degree. It has lots of uses for us here, both in the Arboretum and from a company standpoint. Again, another picture of that high surface area. All those nooks and crannies are places for microbes to kind of go and do their thing. And all of our trials tend to start in greenhouses where we have a little bit more control on things. So here's just a quick shot of using different rates of char with highly susceptible to Phytophthora plant material. I believe these were gardenias. You can see the one on the end was a control with the white flagging, and the one on the very end in purple was the highest rate of char with compost mix. And those two ingredients are the key to success with using biochar. We found is compost and a high rate of biochar. Taking it out into a field, vinca and gardenias, which we inoculated that soil with Phytophthora root rot, and the control, the plants suffered and eventually curled up and died. The middle one is just straight compost, and then biochar in the end, and you can visually see the results there. Same thing here, biochar and compost off in the distance, nice, bright green and healthy. No amendments, just our lovely North Carolina red clay soil with a little bit of mulch for top dressing, and you can visually see the difference in the vigor of those plants. We've done lots of off-site trials here in Charlotte, Clemson University, lots of other places. This is one I was involved with in Chicago and Bucktown, where we did a number of urban trees, mostly elms, and did some good old-fashioned vertical mulching where we incorporated that biochar down in the holes. And we did this project with the folks at the Morton Arboretum with some help from some local tree planting folks. So biochar has lots of good touchy-feelies. We're very excited about it. We've been working with it for over 12 years now. You know, what doesn't it do? You know, there are no immediate fertilizer or fertility effects. You know, you need to add compost and fertilizer as needed to have those short-term effects. Doesn't always act the same. Biochar is not biochar is not biochar. Corn stover acts differently from wood chips. They act differently from switchgrass. Some of the particles can sway the pH, and we found all this stuff kind of through trial and error. And there's also some plant species that respond differently. So there's lots of other factors that we're looking at and stumbling across. Doesn't allow us to ignore any of the other factors, all those cultural things that I've mentioned, and we'll talk about some more in a second. You know, it's not a silver bullet. It's not a fix-all. It's not going to fix all your landscape problems. It doesn't do any of these things either. But you know, we're very excited about it. There's a lot of good information that we're working with other folks, and kind of stay tuned as we move along into the future with biochar. And also there's a little bit of buyer beware. I've seen bags of potting soil in the big box stores, and on the bag it says now contains biochar. How much is in there? Where did it come from? So take everything kind of with a grain of salt. So another cultural thing kind of in the sustainable landscape management trend is plant selection and ultimately planting. Very important components in having a healthy landscape. Excuse me. So number one guideline in plant selection is thinking long-term, seeing down the road, what's the end result of what you're trying to do with those plants. And again, this may not relate so much from our garden management standpoint, but our audience, our volunteers, those folks that work with us in their home landscapes, this can be more of an issue. But I've seen in gardens where things can kind of get away from you. So it's relevant all across the board. You know, what's the ultimate height and size of that plant going to be? This was a street tree planting here in Charlotte where after they had planted these trees, you know, they were already touching the power lines, you know, not thinking how big they're going to be, not thought after very well. So thinking long-term and down the road. The mulching, we'll talk about in just a little bit. But again, site selection, thinking about the needs of those plants, you know, maybe planting dogwoods in a parking lot strip where people are going to cut through and trample those roots to death might not have been the best choice of a landscape tree. So just driving home that thinking long-term down the road. And cannot stress enough the diversity in our landscapes, all those levels of plant material for not just the visual aesthetic of beauty, but also homes for beneficial insects, home for pollinators. Just having that diversity is crucial to a healthy landscape. You know, if you plant 1,000 of the same thing, all those plants are going to suffer the same Achilles heels that they suffer. So, you know, long term. So plant material selection guidelines, there's lots of things out there. Most of us at this point in our career know what signifies a healthy, good, high quality plant. But if you're a stickler for numbers and resources, this is the American Standard for Nursery Stock. It's 129 friendly pages. It actually says that in their ad on all aspects of selecting plants for your landscape. So if that's something that you'd like to get your hands on, it might be free online. I can't remember, but it's a good resource with lots of charts and things. But, you know, like anything you buy, you know, it behooves you to kind of kick the tires before you purchase things, just to kind of see what's going on with those plants in their respective nurseries. You know, steer away from things like this where there's lots of roots coming out the bottom of the pots. You know, take things out of the pots and look at them at the nursery to kind of see what's going on. You want to kind of steer away from things that are root bound and you're already inheriting some cultural problems with that. You know, these were some plants that we bought for a demonstration from a big box store, and had these huge galls on them, which was great from a teaching perspective, but most people wouldn't know that that was something bad. So it's good to kind of look and see what you're buying. You know, steer away from this kind of stuff where things have outgrown the pots. And, you know, we all know this. Look for quality in your plant material, selection and diversity. You want to buy plants from people that know what they're selling. And price, of course, is always an important factor as well. But, you know, think globally and act locally. If you've got local nursery people that you work with, buy plants from them and share those sources. And the same goes for our local garden centers as well. And I'm a big believer in that, and have lots of those resources to share. And talking about planting quickly, you know, two of the quickest ways to kill something in a garden is to plant it incorrectly and to give it too much love, too much water. So we've done a lot of research here on planting, because again, that's the first step out of the pot and into the ground. Looking for the root flare is very important. Mulching after planting, but not up around that root flare. You know, if you're planting something in a basket, try to remove that and dig a big enough hole for those new stressed roots to go into some nice smooth soil and start their life off on a good foot. So walking into landscapes, walking into urban areas, my eyes are always drawn to things like this. There's no visible root flare on this nice street tree, which is thriving because it's a sweet gum, but you know, you want to plant at that root flare. This is at Princeton University, and if it looks like a telephone pole going to the ground, there's going to be some inherent problems there. You know, you want to see that nice flaring section of that tree as it goes to the ground. You don't want to see this. We do lots of tree autopsies here, where we'll get permission gleefully to go to a site and dig some things out of the ground. This plant was almost 3 feet in the ground before we came up on the root flare. Not a good scenario. I'm not planting many things balled and burlap, but there are still a lot of nurseries that do that. And I'm sure a lot of you may still use some of that size plant material, but a lot of root flare problems begin here, where that soil has been piled up onto the ball before the burlap is tied. So it's really important to pull that away and find that zone before you plant and get it at that grade. Not the end of the world if you can't get a cage off of a plant, but it's going to help that tree down the road if you can. And it's a pretty simple process to do. Once you have that tree in a hole and it's got some stability, you can cut those bottom rings off and pull that off relatively easily. Preaching to the choir, but if you get a balled and burlap tree, you kind of have to take the straps off of it. This was at a city not far from here where they were replanting some crab apples. And I asked the crew why they left the straps on. And they told me they needed those straps to take the trees out of the ground when they died. So there's some logic there, maybe, but that's going to choke that plant and end up killing it. And you should remove that. We plant mostly containers here, and I'm sure a lot of you do too, and a lot of our audience does. And we've developed some basic characteristics and techniques for planting. One of the Achilles heels of containerized plant is that plant probably started as a bare root seedling in a quart pot, then a gallon pot, then a 3-gallon, and up and up and up. And if that layer of roots isn't disturbed, you run into situations like this where you've got those girdling roots, and that can cause a lot of problems down the road. There's a lot of air pots and fabrics being used in the nursery trade that help with that girdling root system, but they're not as prevalent as it would be nice to see. They don't work with a lot of nursery systems. I've got a pot system, and I've had a hard time finding ones that work for us, and they tend to be more expensive. So I think there's a lot more work that can be done here, and a lot more sharing of this sort of technology. And what I have seen, they do seem to work pretty well. And, you know, the best thing is to get that thing out of the pot and into the landscape relatively quickly. So when we're planting containers, we're pretty aggressive with them. We have these cultivating forks, which we affectionately call root ticklers, and we'll pull apart those roots so that they're loose from that root ball and try to get as much of that soilless medium away from there as we can, to where we end up with something like this. And then plant that in the ground where we can see the root flare. Use the soil from the site. Don't bring in a lot of soil. You don't want to recreate the pot situation. Once you have your soil in place, water it in. We immediately will mulch, and if we need to stake, we stake, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. But here's kind of a good before and after with a 5-gallon cherry tree. You can see a lot of girdling roots there, and you can see right where we're tearing that apart, there's no root flare. We had to go down 4 inches before we found that. Imperative for the success of that tree to start off from that position. And again, just using the soil that's there, pulling it up, watering it in, and just a summary of that. You know, backfill with your existing soil. Don't bring in a lot of topsoil. You want tough love. You want that plant to get used to where it's going to be. If you need to add fertilizer, this is a good time to do some slow release, especially things that need to be closer to the root system. Irrigate immediately after. If you're tearing that plant up, it's going to help alleviate a little bit of that stress. Mulch with whatever flavor you like, something with high in organic matter. Add mycorrhiza inoculants and biostimulants. The jury's still kind of out on that stuff. In theory, there should be enough of that in the existing soil already, and there should be enough of that in the organic matter that you're using in your mulch. But if there's something that you use that works, keep on trucking with it. So on a planting front, we've looked at, you know, we inherit a lot of plant problems from a company perspective. And when we work in gardens, we inherit the same types of things. So we did a trial several years ago looking at trees that are planted in containers right out of the container straight into the ground. And then another subset of the same species where we really aggressively ripped up that root system and came up with some really interesting things. So they were in the ground for 6 years, and then we got a tree spade so that we could rip those out of the ground and look at them and see what was going on at that environment under the ground. So pulled them all out, took every bit of soil off those trees with an air spade and a high pressure hose. And here's what we found. The one on the left that looks like a wagon wheel, that's the disturbed plant. Those roots actually went all the way out into the other rows. That's best case scenario. You want to see that. The one on the right, you can still see that 10-gallon container and those circling, girdling roots. And if you looked closer, you could see the 3, you could see the 1, you could see all those different zones. So very important to pull those roots away. Here's another close-up look of that control, and you can clearly see that container. And here's a close-up of the one where we really ripped up that tree's root system. Another one undisturbed, pretty ugly. So the bottom line is, when you first do that, there's a little bit of stress that's associated, but the long-term effects of the trees that you disturb that root system, they're going to last longer and be healthier in the landscape. That transferred out into the real world. This was a planting of red maples and American elms heading into downtown Charlotte, had a heavy thunderstorm, and 150 of these fell over all in the same direction. Because the root system had not been disturbed, it was basically like a light bulb in a socket with nothing to help support that tree, and they all just kind of fell over in the same direction. And here you can kind of see there's no roots going out to help stabilize and hold that tree up. Looking a little bit closer, you can see how small that foliage is. Those trees were dead when they were planted and they didn't know it. The ones behind it, you can see in the distance, the one laying on the ground that looked nice and green, those are ones that had been replanted from trees that had previously died. But lots of bad things going on here. The trees were stressed already. They were planted too deep. The root balls weren't disturbed. They had been staked too long, so they weren't allowed to move and help develop a good root system. All easy cultural things that could have been fixed on the front end. On the note of staking, there's a lot of guidelines for that as well. And generally what we tell people is, and we've done a little bit of research on this, if the tree's in an area where it's going to be bumped into by people, you might want to stake it to protect it. If it's loose, once you plant it, just to give it a little bit of stability for one growing season, plant it. Otherwise, if you can get away without staking, that's kind of a best case scenario. The reasons for that is the taper of that tree develops as it moves back and forth in the wind and helps build up that root system. And if you inhibit that with staking longer than a growing season, it slows down that development and can cause problems. The other bad thing about staking is, preaching to the choir. I know none of us have done this, but forgetting to take off that rope mechanism or whatever is holding that tree on ends in this kind of slow death for an urban tree. I don't think these prices hold up in the current market. It might be a little more expensive, but this is a system that we use with a lot of bare root stuff that works very well, called the Tremado. I think you can buy these through A.M. Leonard, and it's got a rubber band mechanism that keeps that tree stable, but it still allows it to kind of move back and forth, which helps with that taper. These things don't take themselves off. We will sometimes forget them. The picture down in the corner there. So the nice thing about these is, yes, they cost a little bit expensive, but you can reuse these and reuse these. You just have to remember to take them off after a growing season. Talking a little bit about mulch, another easy cultural thing that we can do to better do a sustainable landscape management approach to our landscapes is mulching. It's an easy way to improve plant health care. It has lots of good effects. That the take-home message is 2 to 4 inches is plenty deep enough, and keep it off that root crown area. So going back to the street tree picture, it still baffles me that this is done in the modern age of just piling a mulch on top of mulch on top of mulch and getting that mulch volcano. That has so many detrimental effects to the health of that tree. The tree will develop a secondary root system in there because it's nice, moist, warm, and organic. And then when that dries out, it kills that root system. Those roots can girdle the stem, and that tissue above the root flare is very sensitive to that moisture, that heat, and that organic matter, and can cause all kinds of problems as well. It gets very hydrophobic and hard to break up also. And, doesn't benefit anything like this. So again, preaching to the choir, rehashing things that we know, the benefits of mulch. One of the big ones that we are looking at closer here is, what's the temperature of that soil under mulch? It helps keep that at a more constant rate. Mulch does great work conserving the soil moisture in that area. It's incredibly beneficial as it breaks down to adding organic matter. It reduces compaction from mowers, from walking, from whatever. It helps prevent erosion. That soil's not going to wash away, that's bare. And it helps eliminate competition with turf grass, which has 2 benefits. One is you're not running a stringline trimmer up near the tree or a heavy lawnmower. Excuse me, but here's a small shot of tree roots underneath grass and how much they have to compete with that. And underneath the mulch, it's kind of night and day. We're looking more at how mulch affects the temperature under the soil, and in turn, how that affects, excuse me, plant roots. This was a really quick one that we did in Texas many years ago. San Antonio, the air temperature of 105 degrees. The temperature in the sun was 130. That the bare soil using a surface thermometer was 102. Underneath the grass, it was 92 degrees. Underneath 3 inches of mulch, 76 degrees. That's a much more beneficial environment to keep trees from getting stressed out in the hot part of the summer. So a simple, easy thing to do culturally to be good stewards of a sustainable landscape. Seeing a lot more rocks used in commercial, urban, and homeowner landscapes. This doesn't tie into gravel gardening by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of this has come with the cost of mulching, the time and energy of it. Also, fire hazards, particularly out west. And we've been getting a lot of questions here about that. Some people may like that aesthetic, but there's zero organic matter being recharged into the soil. The heat reflection is tremendous with this. There's no water holding capabilities with any kind of stone. The temperature swings are very dramatic from day to night. And if you've got to weed something like that or take a dead tree out, it's an absolute mess to deal with. So we try to steer people away from that. I mentioned earlier, a very quick and easy and efficient way to murder plants in our landscapes is bad watering practices. You know, how much is enough? And there are so many variables there. It depends on your soil, your organic matter, the plant species. A good rule of thumb is, you know, irrigate every 5 to 7 days. And I always tell people to err on the end of longer, more tough love when you don't have sufficient natural rainfall. That's a ridiculous statement to say to somebody in San Diego, California, as compared to here, but a decent rule of thumb. Other ways to monitor your moisture in your soil, things like tensiometers. We're looking at several soil moisture systems that are on the market to see their efficacy and how well they work, both in my garden areas in the Arboretum, but also from a homeowner standpoint. So stay tuned for some research on that front. There's a lot of stuff out in the market now that helps with that. Being a good steward of the land and a good sustainable landscape manager, system maintenance for these things is crucial. Nothing gets in my craw more than seeing a system that is spraying water in the streets or a sidewalk or a head that's been broken for weeks because no one's checking that system and maintaining it. It's such a waste of a very precious resource, and shouldn't be done like that. An easy way to monitor your irrigation systems for use of water is a rain sensor. I also hate to see these things come on and during a torrential downpour. It's a relatively inexpensive thing that can be added to most clocks, and it's a good sustainable thing to do. There's also a lot of new heads out, new filters that help to maximize the amount of water that you're using in your landscapes. All very simple things to use and do to be good managers in your landscape. See a lot of these in street tree plantings, the water bags or gator bags. It's a good resource because it allows you to kind of monitor particular street trees. Doesn't do much from a shrub bed perspective, but if you're doing a street tree planting, they can be useful. The Achilles heel of those is they don't fill themselves up. Somebody has to fill these up. This was a school right down the street from here where a community tree program planted these things, put the water bags on them, and never visited the trees again. I drove by there this morning. These were planted 4 years ago. These bags are still on the trees, and every one of these trees is dead. Somebody has to put water in them. I love seeing things like this. When we were in San Diego Zoo for APGA, it was really amazing to see how they harvest water off of structures. I think every new home that's built should have this kind of system on it to take advantage of things like this. This is my father-in-law's house in Raleigh, North Carolina. That captures all the water off his garage so that he can irrigate his turf grass. Other water saving things that we're looking at here at the Arboretum is maintaining and kind of channeling water with plants. This is a rain garden that we put in. After having to get one of our ponds repaired because of silt damage, we put this rain garden in, which completely eliminated the problem and discharged water that was typically silty, made it clear with something as simple as putting in a rain garden in an area where the water collected. So a really good thing from a sustainable landscape management standpoint to incorporate in our landscapes. And I mentioned water being a precious resource. That's not going to go away anytime soon, whatever side of the fence you are with climate change. So I mentioned some resources. I'm going to kind of tie things up with that. There's so much stuff on the web if you're interested in, but these are just some that I have come across for many years. Dr. Ed Gilman from University of Florida has done a lot of work with our researchers here. He's done a lot of really good work on sustainable landscape management, managing trees and landscape. Anything that he's got his name on is absolute gold. Definitely look into that. Gary Watson from the Morton Arboretum is another colleague of ours, and this is a practical science of planting trees that came out a couple of years ago. This is very inexpensive. It's a great resource if you're training volunteers on planting anything in your landscapes and your gardens. This is an easy thing that's easy to read and understand and easy to pass on and encourage people to have it in their libraries. This recommended urban trees from Cornell has probably been around since I was in college. It's all online, but it's invaluable resources and just good information to have from a training and fallback perspective. And the ISA has done a lot of these best management practices. This is a new one that came out on tree planting not too long ago, and it's one worth picking up. And on the integrated pest management front, this one was just updated through ISA on the right, and the pamphlet on the left from University of California was also done in concert with ISA. Both really good practical resources that I encourage you to grab and have at your disposal. So that's it, the end of the rambling. I hope this was a good recap and not too much of a repeat for you, but happy to take any questions, and we'll throw up a slide here with my email address on it that once it's all said and done, if you have time to think and want to circle back, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email and we can discuss things from that standpoint. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. That was really great. You ran through so many different topics, so it was really helpful. We do have a few questions that have come up. Linda asks, does the Bartlett garden monitor pollinators?
That's a really good question. We do. I'm very lucky to have a lot of scientists that I work with, excuse me, and we have an entomologist on staff who is here. And we have just put in several pollinator gardens. We just planted the second phase of a Piedmont prairie, and all those things were put in place to beat that dead horse of sustainable landscape management, to take advantage of parts of the property where we could increase the diversity, both in plant life and in insect and animal life. So the pollinator gardens, there's one at our conference center. We monitor that for pollinators, beneficial insects, and other things, what plants work best. We just started doing that in the prairie this year. We had some interns that did some insect captures, and what they were looking at was what types of things are going to be in those diverse populations like the prairie, as opposed to just a regular no-mown area where we're not doing much from a plant diversity standpoint. And you know, what we found was obvious, but just amazing, that of course there's going to be a lot more insect activity with the diversity. But just simple things like that are just great talking points when we have people here, and stuff that I'm very interested in, and we'll continue to do more of that sort of thing here.
Great, thank you. Linda also made a comment, in the greater Portland, Oregon area, leaves left on the beds hide a multitude of pests. We pull the leaves, shred, and compost.
I think that's a good thing. You know, most folks think and are taught that every leaf has to come out from underneath the tree, and you're basically taking away that tree system to kind of recharge itself. The only negative thing that I've ever run across about disturbing that leaf litter is there's a lot of beneficial caterpillars that will pupate and nest in that leaf litter. You know, I would say that you're doing more good than harm because you're keeping that mulch there to help recharge. But you know, in terms of that leaf litter hiding disease and insects, I think that would be negligible. I don't think there's going to be, from a disease standpoint, that much bad stuff going on there. From an insect standpoint, there's not going to be that much harmful insects. There might be some issues with voles. I know we run across that here, where voles will use that area to live through a winter and can nibble on plants. But the fact that you're leaving that stuff, I think that's something that we should champion and do.
All right. Michael asks, regarding air spading, do you have a preferred timing for correcting soil issues? Is this an operational preference or plant benefit issue? Thanks.
It's both. We initially got into the air spading to improve trees that were declining. And we quickly realized that it's a great tool to use when you're transplanting trees because it helps loosen up that interface. It's a great thing to do to trees that have just been planted, again, so that if you think about, you dig a hole, you've got nice loose soil, and then everything's compacted outside of that. Air spading that area around a newer tree helps those roots get into that harder zone a little bit easier. So it's a little bit of both. We try to do air spading when there's some soil moisture already in the ground. So if you're doing it during a dry spell, we'll water for a couple days with soaker hoses or other means so that that soil already has some moisture in it. So from a timing standpoint, that's really the only hurdle that I would see. It's kind of reliant on the timing that you have to do it more than anything.
All right. And we have another question of, what is the leaf collection equipment that you showed us called?
We have zero turn mowers, and it's just a bagging attachment that ties into the discharge off of that lawnmower, and you affix the basket behind. And there's different types or different flavors of equipment. We use a couple of different types of mowers, but if you got in touch with whoever services your mowers or whoever you buy your mowing equipment from, pretty much everybody has something that works, and there's lots of aftermarket stuff. I like the zero turn things because it's a lazy way to do it. You don't ever have to get off the machine. And we're doing it today. We're going in areas where the leaf litter is heavy. We go over it like we're mowing. It sucks the leaves in. On some of those attachments, there's a piece that will grind up the leaves before it goes into the back of the mower. And you'll know when that's full, and then you just drive to a bed back into it. And there's a lever on ours that you can lift. You don't even have to get off the machine, and it dumps the leaves into a bed, and then we spread those out later on top of the mulch, or we incorporate it in with mulch. But there's lots of aftermarket stuff out there that fit pretty much anything from, you know, the old sit on top riding belly mowers that we all used as kids to the zero turn, more commercial sides of things. And if you don't want to bag them, they make things that you can block the chute with so that it stays in the deck. You just grind the leaves up. We do that also. And you can buy mulching blades, which have different blade points on them and more surface area to cut up bigger surface leaves, unlike small thin blades of grass. And again, those can be gotten at A.M. Leonard or any of your retail lawn folks.
Right. Julie says, when planting trees, what is your opinion of slicing the edges of the root ball rather than teasing the roots out?
Anything you do is going to be beneficial than just taking that plant and sticking it straight in the ground. If that's all you have time for, that's better than not doing anything. It always surprises people when we do demonstrations where we really rip that up. It's a horrific thing to look at because you're shaking that tiny little thing asunder. There's soil going everywhere. There's roots going everywhere. And the end result is going to be, yeah, there's going to be some stress associated with that, both with you planting it and the plant itself. But long term, the shelf life of that plant is going to be much better for it because you've allowed that plant to have those roots go off in different areas. At a minimum, you should slice that if that's all that you have time for. And not everything needs that. Some things are more aggressive than others, but at a minimum, do that they used to call it butterflying the root ball. That's better than not doing anything at all.
All right, thank you. And Linda has a comment here. It must be regarding the pests under the leaves that she said slugs.
On the photo I showed?
No, I think Linda was talking about shredding the leaves and composting them.
Yes.
And so I think she's saying slugs is what's hiding underneath the leaves.
Yes, I feel your pain, Portland, with those. I didn't think about that. I would think that would be much better than having to deal with the slugs. They are abominational in the Pacific Northwest.
And then we have one last question right now, and I think this is kind of a follow-up on the leaf collection equipment. Is there a collection mechanism you'd recommend if your site doesn't have a lot of lawn, but gardening beds?
Definitely something that captures those so that you have the ability to kind of dump them where you want to dump them. It's well worth the cost of that. We kind of fought it for a couple of years, and we demoed one, and it was like, why haven't we been doing this all along? Again, the benefit of that is from a user standpoint and a time standpoint, you don't have to get off the machine. It'll fill up pretty quickly. You'll hear it, and you turn the mowing deck off, you back over to a bed, and you dump it into the bed, and you keep on going. There are leaf vacuums that you can pull behind things where you can windrow the leaves and suck them up and it grinds it, but that's a little more labor intensive. But again, if you have limited lawn space, that's another alternative. And they make those in all different sizes. Ones that fit on the back of pickup trucks, ones that can be pulled by little utility vehicles. It's just a good way to take what's perceived as a waste product and recharging it back into the landscape. So I would look into the mower mounted ones and or the vacuums that you can pull with a utility vehicle, a pickup truck or bigger. Those are all good things to have from a sustainable landscape management maintenance standpoint.
All right. Well, thank you, Greg. That was the end of our questions, and we're at 1 o'clock on the dot. So again, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.